This is the representation of the kind of quality of speakers that we have here at West Hawaii Forum. And we put these monthly forums on to provide as much civic involvement and education on issues that are important to you, the community. We are one island. We are one community.
Aloha and good evening, everybody. My name is Jane Clement. I am the president of Community Forums. We are a very small nonprofit organization, all volunteers, and I would like to introduce the rest of our board members who are here tonight. Pete Hoffman at the back. Yay. Isaiah Heyer manning our camera at the back there. Scott Ordway, soundboard. Mike Matsukawa, I think, is up front welcoming people in, and Candy Ellsworth, who's not here tonight with us. I want to say thank you, everybody, for being here tonight and joining us. We host and organize these monthly forums on various topics and issues that are important to you. Tonight, especially, is a very important topic because I am the first to admit that I have very little knowledge about Constitutional Convention, and I am really looking forward to learning a lot tonight from our wonderful speakers. Two of them flew in from Honolulu this afternoon, so thank you guys for joining us. And of course, our two other speakers are from here on the Big Island, and we will hear from them shortly. We also would like to thank the League of Women Voters. May I ask them to please stand up and be recognized? We are hosting this forum tonight jointly with them, and we want to thank them for their support. We also would like to thank our community who support us and for helping us continue to do this monthly forum. McDonald's of Hawaii, who always provide the refreshment for us every time. Thank you, Robert and Kathy Leopoldino. We are also recording this forum, and it will be broadcast on Naleo TV later on in the week or in a couple of weeks. We want to also thank Naleo for allowing us the opportunity to reach a broader audience through the broadcast of this forum. And after it gets shown on Naleo TV, we will then put up this video on our website, www.westhawaiiforums.org. You can find this forum and all of the other past forums, videos, and materials from speakers on that website. So if you ever want to look at other issues and topics that we've covered in the past, that's all in our website. And at this point, I know we have a lot to get to. I would like to introduce our wonderful moderator. We can't do this without her. No need to, further introduction. Our wonderful Ms. Sherry Bracken.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Aloha. Aloha. I'm delighted to be here. Jane said that she thought she needed education in a constitutional convention, and I definitely do as well. So I'm really glad that we're having this forum tonight because this is a huge question that we'll be asked to vote on in November, and it's really important to learn about it. Jane already thanked almost everybody, but I really am grateful to the League of Women Voters for initiating this. And by the way, you guys, there's chairs here. You can come and sit down. You don't have to lean on the wall. You're going to get tired, I guarantee. Oh, not the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts never sit down. I got that. We are wonderfully supported in sound tonight by Scott Ordway and Isaiah Heyer, and I really am grateful to them because you can have a great forum, but if we don't hear these speakers talk, then it will not be really as helpful as it could be. Now, the general election is coming up on Tuesday, November 6th, but absentee ballots, which is where the majority of our votes are cast, are going to be mailed out according to our state election or our county elections office starting around October 9th. So you may see your ballot as early as like the 10th or 11th, so it really is important to pay attention to what you're going to have to vote on. Walk-in voting, which counts as absentee voting, opens up on October 23rd and goes through November 3rd. So you have lots of ways to vote, and I'm assuming all of you here are already registered, but if you are not and you would like to, the League of Women Voters folks have the forms. If you would like to request an absentee ballot, either for this coming election or for all elections, which is what I do because the ballot comes to my house and I don't forget to vote, you can do that through the forms that the League of Women Voters has, or you may go online to elections.hawaii.gov. And by the way, if you know anybody who's not registered and they don't do any of those above things, you can register and vote at walk-in voting or on election day. But it's going to take you longer because they're going to have to verify your address and where your polling place is and all that. So encourage people to do all that in advance. Now, in the November election, we will vote on 2 county charter amendments. One is about the County Salary Commission and whether they should take public input. The other county charter amendment would require any charter amendments to include financial impact, financials, revenues, expenditures, taxes, fiscal liabilities. Those are 2 county charter amendments that we'll be voting on. That's not what we're going to talk about tonight, but I just wanted to let you know because most people don't know what's going to be on the ballot. Additionally, there's going to be 2 questions that relate to the state. One is, that we're not discussing tonight, one is an amendment to the state constitution that will ask, quote, shall the legislature be authorized to establish, as provided by law, a surcharge on investment real property to be used to support public education, end quote. That's what you're going to be voting on, one of the things you'll be voting on. And that's a really general statement, and we're going to explore that more at a forum in Hilo, at the Ark of Hilo on the 27th of September. That's a Thursday, next Thursday, from 4:30 to 6. So if you live in Hilo, which some folks here do, or if you're watching, Hilo, Ark of Hilo on Thursday 27th from 4:30 to 6. And we'll be doing a similar exploration here at West Hawaii Civic Center Council Chambers on Wednesday, October 3rd from 6 p.m. to 8. Wednesdays are a different day than the usual days. They have the forums here, but that's the day we're going to do it, Wednesday, October 3rd. And then in Waimea, there's going to be the Waimea Town Meeting on Thursday, October 4th, and they will also deal with the Education Amendment. But that's not what we're doing tonight. Tonight we're going to address the state ballot question that says this: shall there be a convention to propose a revision of or amendments to the state constitution? And we have 4 speakers to talk about that this evening. And as usual for these forums, first each one of them is going to talk a little bit, give us their mana'o, and then we are going to take questions. So we already have some questions that were submitted, but if you have questions, please, there are cards. If you need a card, wave your hand in the air, and Donna Oba in the back will bring you the card or the paper on which you can write your question. And the only thing I ask is that you write in big letters and clearly so I don't miss what the point of your question is. I'd like to introduce our panel. First up, and who will be speaking first also, is Peter Adler, PhD. He'll be telling us what a constitutional convention is and give us some grounding in this. Peter's done a lot of work and talking with people and doing study about this, probably because he's sort of a political science nerd. I'm sorry, Peter, you didn't use that in your bio, but I'm just saying that's what you are. He's a consultant. He's back in Hawaii now for many years after 10 years as president of the independent think tank and consulting firm, the Keystone Center in Colorado. And he has a very long history of collaborative projects and problem solving here in Hawaii, including all about water management, resource planning, land planning, marine and coastal issues, and more. He's held executive positions with the Hawaii Justice Foundation, the Hawaii Supreme Court's Center for Alternative Dispute Resolution, and the Neighborhood Justice Center. And he was a Peace Corps volunteer in India, and he's been an instructor for various programs. Peter Adler is very well published and very well respected, and I'm super happy to have him here. Thank you, Peter, for being here with us. Chad Blair is the politics and opinion editor for Civil Beat. It's a really outstanding online news source. If you're not familiar with Civil Beat, it was founded by Pierre Omidyar, who also founded eBay, so clearly is being very generous in using his funds to support good journalism. Civil Beat is not a blog. It's a respected journalistic source. They check facts, they are accurate, they have high journalistic standards. And Chad has been a writer, editor, and teacher in Honolulu for more than 25 years. And how long was Civil Beat, Chad?
This is now my 9th year.
Yeah, you've been there a while. And Chad also has a background with Pacific Business News, Hawaii Public Radio. Full disclosure, I also do news for Hawaii Public Radio, and I'm also with Lava 105, so Chad and I are colleagues. And he still shows up on Hawaii Public Radio on The Conversation on Thursdays usually, but you know, he and his colleagues, they give additional input on some of the important issues. Chad has won many awards, and he got his master's and PhD from UH Manoa. And he's going to be speaking in favor of the ballot question because Civil Beat has come out in their editorials supporting having a constitutional convention. And we have to give Chad a particular round of applause, maybe to keep him awake, because he flew in from Texas yesterday and he thinks it's midnight. Thank you for being here, Chad. Lei Kihoi. Many of you know Lei Kihoi. She is a Kona resident and attorney. She has a long history in constitutional law. She's been with the Intermediate Court of Appeals. She's worked before the State Supreme Court. She's a Native Hawaiian rights lawyer. She's licensed in both Hawaii and Washington, D.C. She serves as an advisor on many boards. She's also been a lobbyist. She was on, or is on, the Native Hawaiian Roll Commission. She's a commissioner from Hawaii Island. She's a family court guardian ad litem. She's a ho'oponopono practitioner, mediator, and facilitator. And Ms. Kihoi is going to speak against having a constitutional convention. And we're very happy she's here tonight with us. And finally, we have David Tarnas. David Tarnas is a 32 resident of the Big Island. He's married with 2 amazing children. They are amazing, yes. Very impressive. He works as an environmental and community planner with public and private sector clients. He served as a Hawaii State representative for Kona Kohala from 94 to 98, and he's on the ballot in November to assume that same position. He was also UHC grant agent for West Hawaii from 90 to 94. He's currently on the Waikoloa Community Leadership Council and South Kohala Traffic Safety Committee. And he's been an executive with startups and nonprofits, and he's a volunteer for many groups. And we've asked Mr. Tarnas to be here tonight to talk about some neighbor island implications, because as you all know, you're here, sometimes neighbor islands get a little bit lost in the translation when Oahu is doing something and controlling a process. So I'm delighted that we'll hear from David. Thank you, David, for being here. So we're going to get on with the forum, and we're going to start with Peter Adler. He is going to help us understand what a constitutional convention is. He has, as I mentioned, done a lot of study on the topic, and he's had working groups going on Oahu to get a lot of input from a lot of people.
Well, thank you, Sherry. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm kind of reminded, we have about, 30 or 40 people in the room, and I heard a story about another speaker in a group like this, and he was supposed to just speak for 15 minutes, and the room was filled, and after, he went on a little bit too long, and after about 20 minutes, he noticed that about a third of the people had left, and after 45 minutes, everybody had left except one person in the front row. And he said, "How come you're still here?" He said, "I'm the next speaker." So, slides, where are they? Let's see.
Well, I'm setting my timer, Peter. I just want you to know that.
Good. And I'm going to set mine too. I'll try. I have a lot of slides. I'm not going to go through all of these, or I'll breeze through them, but they will all be posted with the League of Women Voters. They're available to everybody. And my job really is to try to share some of what I think I've learned in the Odyssey to try and understand this. So, next slide. Next slide. So here's we all come into this with some views, and what I've heard so far is some people saying, who cares, it's just politics as usual. Clicker, please, or key. The PAC money and alt-right money, dark money is going to rig the elections, one more, and it's going to cost too much. And on the other side, it says, finally, citizens get a chance to make some changes. One more, I want to put some controls on elected officials. And third, we need to take a look at the state's finances and everything that they're doing. So lots of views. Next slide, please. So I think this is like the proverbial elephant. It's a complicated issue, and we're all looking at different pieces and parts, and you'll hear about some of that tonight. Next slide. This is my view. My view is, let's think hard about this. Let's really study this. Let's think about it. And before you push a button on November 6th, let's really understand the issues. Next slide. Next slide. I'm going to skip through some of these things, but they'll all be there. One more, please. And one more. So I want to start with what became of the previous con-cons. We've had three. The founding one, that when we became a state and we had to have a constitution to be a legitimate state. Then we had one in '68, and that actually was a gathering fairly, as I understand it, fairly respectable and kind of simply tuning things up. It created collective bargaining for public employees. It gave greater control of the counties over their own organization, created voter qualifications, longer tenure terms for the Supreme Court and Circuit Court judges, higher debt limits. Some of this is just kind of mechanical stuff, and some of it was very important. Next slide. In '78 was a big one. It was a bellwether event. And a lot of important things came of it, including the preservation of important ag lands, which is probably more important on some of the other islands because you have lots of land, but it's important here too. The Office of Hawaiian Affairs was birthed in that convention, partially public financed elections, the State Ethics Commission, term limits for the governor and lieutenant governor, annual balanced budget. The Water Commission was born out of that. The public trust doctrine was affirmed. Next slide. So it was an important one. Here's the big thing I think I've learned about this, is that it launched a new political generation. It was very dominated by the newly elected and newly graduated people from the Richardson Law School. And you can see some of these names. I mean, John Wahei, John Pennebaker, Tom Okamura, Barbara Marumoto, Carol Fukunaga. These are names that we've known, and they've launched their political careers, and they became a new generation of political leaders. Next slide. The media played a big role. The media was really pushing hard to make sure that it didn't just become swamped with existing politicians and really was an open kind of a process. So they were on a kind of a crusade to make sure that we'd have fresh faces. That was then. Media is in a different place. Now, some mechanical things. There's three prospective elections. The first one is on November 6th, as Sherry said. That question is whether we will have one or not. And normally, the legislature can actually, in any given year, initiate putting one on the ballot, putting that question on the ballot. Should the citizens convene to amend the Constitution? But if they don't do it, every 10 years it comes on the ballot in a mandatory, it's legal. It requires it to be done. So it's kind of a decadal kind of thing. It's a 10-year thing. If it's not asked for 9 years, the lieutenant governor submits the question to be voted. And if a majority of votes are cast in favor, including blank and flawed votes, which count as no, a convention gets held. That's really kind of an important piece to remember. And I think you'll hear more about it from Chad and Lay and others. And we may want to talk about that because it's kind of a high bar. It's a high bar. If it's defeated, on November 6th, if it goes down, it simply returns to normal. The legislature could create a new constitutional convention in the years ahead, or in 9 years it'll come back on the ballot. Next slide. The second election in this sequence, if voters approve, is the election of delegates. And the legislature will determine the number of delegates. They actually determine a lot of the parameters and the cost of it and the funding of it. The election of delegates takes place at the next regular election unless they choose to do a special election. Any qualified voter is eligible to become a delegate. The con must be convened not less than 5 months prior to the next regular election, and the convention itself determines its own rules and organization. Usually it's going to be some version of parliamentary procedure, But once it's set up, they're in the driver's seat to manage themselves, take in proposals, take in ideas, pass resolutions, do their own work. Vote number 3, if this thing all goes forward, is on any proposed changes that emerge. And those will come on to the next ballot. Any constitutional amendments have to go back to the voters for approval. They also have to be interrogated by the Attorney General to make sure they're worded right and they're legal and so on. But they would come on the ballot, and the questions have to be yes or no, and they can only embrace one subject at a time. So you can't stack up a whole bunch of these. So you would see, if this succeeded, a number of proposed amendments that we citizens would vote on. To pass, the yes votes have to receive a majority of the votes tallied, and blank or flawed votes count as no. Again, that's an important piece to remember. So if you go to the polls on November 6th and you don't vote, or it's a damaged vote, it counts as a no. The total yes votes must constitute at least 50% of the votes cast if it's at a general election, or 30% if the proposed changes are at a special election. I'm going very fast, but all this will be available to you, and my job is really to set the stage. Next slide. So here's a timeline, and I'm not going to go through this, but I'm sure we might want to come back to it later, so we can do that. But it's basically what I just said. So the sequence is, we'll have a vote on November 6th. If it's affirmative, if yes, the legislature will determine the number of delegates, the length, and the time, and the budget. And that would happen in the next legislative session after November in 2019. The delegates would be then elected at the next regular election or a special election, and that would probably be in the spring of 2020. That's when that would take place. Once that takes place, the convention convenes, and it has to convene at least 5 months before the 2020 general election. So there's a window in which all this happens. Once they adjourn, it has to adjourn at least 30 days before the general election, and then November 3rd, 2020, if I have the date right, is when we would go and vote on those amendments. So this is an important timing and sequence. 3 votes that culminate in actual amendments that we would vote on. Next slide. One of the things that worries me a little bit, as I've been doing my walkabout on this issue, is that the declining voter interest in general. Now, the League is very familiar with this, and you've been stalwarts in trying to encourage that. But you can see in 1959, we had 183,000 registered to vote, and we had 171 who actually did turn out, 94%. And you can see where we are in 2016. 750,000 roughly registered to vote, 58% voted, and we know in the last election it's been declining, and this is an off year. So it's very possible a con will be decided by a fairly small group of people. Next slide. Now, people keep asking, what would it cost? And the cost, the legislature will look at different scenarios, and they will, just like you would cost anything, there are different factors. One of those is the number of delegates. In the 78, and I think in 68, there were 102 delegates, which is the number of representatives that we have in the Senate and the House. Or it could be 51, it could be 1, or it could be 25, which I think is the senatorial districts. Am I right about that, Chad?
Well, it would actually be 2 representatives from each of the 51 districts. Yeah, the Senate wouldn't be
That'd be
part
the
of it.
102.
Correct. Well,
Yeah.
the 102 would be 51 times 2.
And 51 would be 1.
Yeah.
One. And what would the 25 would be?
I don't know that
I
the Senate
think
per
it's-
se would be represented in that regard. I believe it would be counted from the House districts
Okay.
only.
So, and they have to make that determination. They would also decide the duration with those kind of bookended dates. They're going to decide, is this going to be 1 month, a month and a half, 3 weeks? What's the duration? How much would delegates be compensated? And what is the per diem allocation for you folks, if you're delegates, to fly in and out? And what is the number and cost of paid staff and facilities and venue? If you rent the convention center, that's one cost item. If you hold it in a state building, that's another one. So it's very hard to get an accurate fix on what it will cost. Next slide. 1978, the legislature allocated $2,500,000 for 102 delegates to meet for not more than 75 days. They actually spent $2 million. They didn't spend it all. What a rarity. Those costs cover the delegate per diems, $1,000 per month, not to exceed $4,000, facility rental, printing, and so on. And there were lots of back office expenses. And so the LRB printed things, and they had, lots of reference bureau work, so that added enough. So it was pretty good.
What is the
Legislative
LRB?
Reference Bureau.
Thank you.
So yeah, that's like the library and the librarians of the legislature. Next slide. So future costs, some estimates around. If you just took the 78 costs and did a multiplier, I think you'd come out around 10 million. That's probably a little low because costs have increased even more. In 2008, there were estimates that ranged from 2,300,000 to 1,100,000 by a commission, and then the LRB said it could go as high as 48 million. Now remember, the state's budget is 7 billion, roughly. So you got to look at the costs of this in the context of a state budget of $7 billion. So that's you got to look at that. I think where you stand on these issues depends on where you sit, as many people have said, in England and elsewhere. And what you see depends on where you stand. So we come at this with different lenses. Next slide, please. So this slide is interesting to me because I dug it off the internet, and it basically says we all come in with ideological predispositions, political leanings of one sort or another. And some of us come in with a very individualistic focus, or a left or a right-leaning focus, or a centrist focus, or a community focus. And so that will become part of your thinking. It needs to be part of your thinking about where you stand. And no one of them is wrong. We're in a lively democracy, and they're all okay. But how people think about these important issues may be driven by some of that. Next issue, Jane. I've been very interested in talking about some of the issues that might come on the table. In other words, trying to anticipate. And as I've been doing what Sherry does so well, interviewing people and talking to people in small groups and individually, what are the things that could come up on the table? One is eliminating the gut and replace. How many of you are familiar with gut and replace? So basically, the legislature right now can leave a document, one of the bills, gut it, and add something into it at the end. And there's a lot of people raising objections to that. So that's something the convention could deal with. Initiative and referendum have come up before. Recall has come up. It came up in '78 and did not pass. It quickly got disposed of in a very narrow vote. Term limits, people have said, I wouldn't mind seeing term limits for legislators. I mean, we have it for the governor and the lieutenant governor. Why not? Unicameral legislature, there's people who said, why do we need two houses? Let's have one. We're not that big. Expanding and enumerating the specific powers of the lieutenant governor, which is kind of open and vague and so on. Having a full-time legislature and prohibiting outside employment is an idea I heard from someone. Having plain English annual financial reports that we could digest and understand. That'd be interesting. Ending the sunshine law exemptions for legislators, they're not subject to it, and establishing the public's right to know. So these are some of the state issues. Next slide. There are county issues that could come on, and David may have comments on this. Providing greater home rule, taxing authorities for the counties, permitting counties to add some additional regulation to agriculture. That was a stormy issue on Maui and on Kauai. And having political subdivisions. We're the only state that has nothing, no municipality, no municipal governments below the counties. Next one. How voting functions, that could be a set of issues. Automatic voter registration, ranked choice, and runoffs of the top candidates, all mail-in voter. These are issues that could potentially come before a convention. How public education functions. Some of these are out of place, but how about full autonomy for the university system? Or decentralizing the school board and reestablishing an elected state board. These are issues that potentially could come on the table. Native Hawaiian community issues would probably come on the table. People might say, I want to really strengthen OHA, native rights, or they may say, I want to weaken it. So again, it depends what corner you come from. Reducing or expanding public trust, and so on. And next slide. There's social issues. Recreational marijuana, strengthening reproductive protections or weakening them, mandating an end to exporting Hawaii's prisoners to the mainland, weakening or strengthening the death with dignity laws. So those are all issues that delegates could propose. I'll be done in 1 second, Sherry. So I was telling Sherry before, this is yin and yang stuff. There's high hopes and dark fears. And again, it all depends on what corner you come from. The high hopes I've heard, people said, it's an opportunity for new ideas and going over the legislature's heads when they don't do enough. And then we can redefine and restructure and reform government. We could spark more citizen participation by engaging people in democracy. We could reaffirm some old values about who we are as a people. And we could spark a new generation of political leaders. And next slide, I'll make that the last one. There are dark fears. People have expressed dark fears. What are those? It could be hijacked by entrenched local interests who have a lot of money to put up for delegates. It could bring in a flood of offshore money, maybe dark money. This is a turbulent time nationally, and you could imagine some of the money coming in to support issues that people might not want. It could erode the gains from some of the gains from '78. It could reignite culture wars, and it could defeat the emergence of a new political generation if all the legislators run for office and become the delegates. So lots of challenges, and I think I'll stop there.
Okay, well, we're going to catch you in the question period, so as you have questions for Peter, be sure to note them down.
But if they're hard questions, ask those.
By the way, don't forget, Peter's slides are going to be up on the West Hawaii Forum's website. And just as information, as some of you know, I host a weekly interview program. And Peter is my guest for this coming Sunday. We just recorded it before we came here. So you can hear him talk again. And that is Sunday morning at 6:30 a.m. on Koa Country, 107.7 FM, 8 a.m. Lava 105.3 FM, or posted as a podcast to lava1053.com. Frankly, I think these issues are pretty complex, and I think it's going to take us more than one thinking and reading and hearing things to get it all. But what's going to happen now is Mr. Chad Blair, awake, back from Texas, is going to share with us why he and Civil Beat believe this is a good thing to do.
Well, first of all, thank you, Sherry. It's weird to be on the other side of a microphone. Usually I'm out there covering a debate, and I'm cowering a little bit knowing how good you are.
Okay, your time's up.
Exactly. And I want to thank Peter for doing a very good job. It is a lot to digest, but I think the way to look at it in many ways boils down to this, and you even used the phrase, basically it's direct democracy. It's putting the power back into your hands. It's taking it over from the legislature because you're not satisfied with what the legislature has been doing. Of course, David may get back in the ledge, and there's a number of compelling things that a legislature can do. But for the Civil Beat editorial board, and I should be clear here, I'm speaking for the editorial board. I'm an editor. I'm not speaking as a reporter. I'm not speaking for the news staff. That is independent. But we came to a decision actually last year that we were going to advocate for a CONCON well before anybody even started to talk about this. We felt that it was something that was long overdue, and we've started to do a series of editorials in favor. There will be more running between now and the election. We also have worked with people in the community, including Peter's CONCON Salon group, and we ran 4 editorials from their group earlier on. You can just go on our website and punch in Constitutional Convention, and you'll see a whole bunch of good stuff come up, pro and con, history. Anita Hofsnyder, one of our reporters, just last week did a terrific story where she talked to John Waihe'e and Walter Ritty and other people that remembered the CONCON who were actually delegates there. Even Daryl Huff, the TV news reporter, I had no idea that he was involved back in then. He's now with Hawaii News now. It's a terrific piece to give you a sense of the history. But our view is it is a chance for you to take back control of your government. Our desire to have a CONCON arose out of a sense of frustration. Now, I should be clear, many of the people that work at Civil Beat are from the mainland, and they'll come here, I'm sure we've all heard this before, with their mainland ideas, and they want to change things, and for some people that's upsetting, and for other people it's like, no, it's good to have fresh blood, fresh input. But having had a lot of our people live in California, or in Oregon, or in Washington State, places where there does exist initiative, referendum, and recall. You mentioned that, Peter, dying in '78. I think initiative is right there at the top of our list. We are one of the few states that does not allow the citizens to put something before the voters. Yes, you have it at the county level. That's been exercised on Maui, as we saw with the GMO stuff. I think Hawaii and the Big Island have their own. I don't know to the extent of what the Charter Commission requires or allows, but I do know the state does not have an initiative process, nor do we have a referendum process. That's where we actually sit back and judge an existing law and decide whether it should still stay on the books. And then, of course, recall means exactly what it says. I don't like you being in office, I'm going to kick you out. And you can just ask Gray Davis in California about that. That brought us Arnold Schwarzenegger. But those particular issues are something that we feel Hawaii should at least have a conversation about it. It did die quickly back in '78. Since then, more states have come around to adopting some form of initiative, referendum, and recall. That's our big baby. Because we feel it's about us taking the power back. And it upsets some people in the legislature that don't want to lose that power. And I think that's something that concerns us as well. I should tell you, it was also specific to some other issues. Hawaii used to be a pretty progressive state. And we can name any number of things, particularly in the 1970s and the 1980s. One that comes to mind is the prepaid health care law of 1974. The idea that if you're working 20 hours a week, your employer has to provide you health care. It's hard to imagine here in 2018 that the Congress is still considering repealing Obamacare. And we'll see whether that happens again. But we were one of the first states, along with Massachusetts, to recognize that health care is a fundamental right, and we should try and take care of each other. And there were a number of other issues as well. Somewhere along the way, our legislature became more conservative. Among the issues that really concerned us was death with dignity, or medical aid in dying, or physician-assisted suicide, whatever brand name you want to call it. And I personally, as a reporter, have seen that come up again and again, and sat through hours of testimony, both pro and con, people in tears talking about their loved ones. But it keeps dying. And a year ago, so to speak, the House Health Committee wouldn't even have a vote on it publicly. Well, lo and behold, last year, the legislature went ahead and finally enacted medical aid in dying, and it becomes, I believe, legal starting in January. That's a pretty remarkable development. And we wonder if maybe the legislature is starting to say, if we don't start acting on these issues, then they're going to have a con, and they're going to take the power away from us, which is what this is all about. Well, I applaud the legislature for moving ahead on that issue, but there's others they have not done so. And Peter outlined a couple of them. Recreational marijuana, decriminalization, legalization, whatever you want to call it, it comes up again and again. I think Russell Ruderman, one of your senators, actually has pushed for this, and it just doesn't really even get a hearing, even though we're looking at states like Washington and Colorado, and we're seeing the enormous revenue that is being generated. I'm not saying there isn't problems with legalizing marijuana, but we do have legal alcohol. And we tax it and we regulate it, and we think that's one of the issues we should at least be able to debate. It never goes anywhere at the legislature. All mail-in voting, that is something that Washington and Oregon and other states have as well. Still a minority, but as Sherry said, the majority of the votes that come in are now absentee. They're from people voting at home, and that trend is going up. And Hawaii, the legislature has held off on pushing all mail-in voting. Well, they finally allowed a pilot project, and it's going to be on Kauai starting in 2020. And based on how that goes, there'll be a report back to the legislature. And our view is, what are we waiting for here? By the way, if we do have statewide mail-in voting, you can still walk into a voting place. That right will not be taken away from you. That exists in Colorado, that exists in Washington, that exists in Oregon. You can still walk in there. You can have voter assistance. You can help people with disabilities. But they have very high voter turnouts. And you saw from Peter's list, it's even lower than I think that last figure you had. It's abominable. So these are kind of the issues that we feel people should take up and do something with. Medical marijuana dispensaries. We were one of the first states to have medical marijuana. And it took us for years to finally have medical pot dispensaries. I think the state finally awarded the last license. Why did that take so long?
Yeah, but we don't have them here on Big Island yet.
Is it still for you guys? Because you're supposed to get 2, right?
We're supposed to get 2. We'd like to get
That hasn't happened yet?
No.
Okay, that's wrong. But you already knew that. Another thing that we keep in mind as to why we want to have a con, and I'll go into a few other things. This comes from Adler's focus group, which is called the Con Salon. They posed a fundamental question. Who are we as a society, and what do we want to become? And I think that's a terrific way of framing it. Not our legislators, us, everybody here. And by the way, in the 78 Con, there were only 2 sitting lawmakers There were part of those, 102 delegates, and I think 2 former incumbents. So it may not necessarily be the case that all these legislators will start running. I would not want that to be the case. So those are the reasons that made us come down to this decision to have a con-con. I will echo just a couple of points from Peter. To have new leadership, younger, diverse politically in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, I think that would be refreshing. You only named 4 or 5. I know that you had another list as well. It's remarkable how many remarkable people came out of the con-con in '78. We'd prefer not to have lawmakers run, but they can. We like to think that this will be, as again, the phrase that Peter's group uses, it will be a citizens' conclave. That's a nice phrase. Citizen, I like that. I mean, lawmakers are citizens too, but I'd rather have them just fund it and give us the building to have it, and maybe a few of them get involved. Here's another thing. We have polled this issue twice now, and in both polls, a healthy majority of the people that we surveyed, registered voters, said they want a con-con. About 20% are against it, and I think here's the most important question. 17% said they don't even know what it is. And that goes to the point Peter made about education. I mean, the whole no vote thing is insane. But if you don't even know what you're going to vote on, you're going to leave that thing blank. A couple of other points. You mentioned term limits. Why is it the governor and the lieutenant governor have term limits? But that is not the case with the state legislature. It does exist at the counties, finally, right? That's a county decision for the mayors, the prosecutors, the council members, but the legislatures can run as long as they want to. I personally don't believe in term limits. I believe a term limit is decided by the voter. But many people on our board, and others as well, feel that that is a healthy thing to have. Term limits, by the way, we cannot limit Congress. That's something that has to be done at the federal level. Another thing, what about a lottery? What about a lottery for education? We are one of, I think, only 2 states that has no form of gambling at all. And you know what the other state is? Utah. But nearly every state that I can think of has Powerball, has some sort of form of lottery. And a lot of that money is dedicated at the discretion of the government to go to government services, including education. There are problems that come with lottery, and it tends to hurt people that are poor. They tend to spend more on it. And I recognize those arguments, but you should at least have the option. Peter mentioned ranked choice voting and top 2 primaries. I won't go into too much detail, but it's another way to get new blood into office. Are there dark problems that could come from a con-con? Yes, Peter talked about that too. California comes to mind, and I think the most famous ballot initiative that really screwed a lot of things up was the Proposition 13 issue in California on taxes being capped at a very low level, and that began to hurt education very much. A couple of years ago, California had Prop 22 on gay rights. They basically limited they limited marriage to between 1 man and 1 woman. We did that too, actually, back in 1998. California later came back and changed that. But this is finally the bottom line. Ultimately, whatever comes out of a con-con has to come back to us again. There has to be a vote on it. It doesn't go to the legislature. It goes back to you to decide. In '78, every single one of those amendments passed, amazingly. Yeah. So there would be a referendum, if you will, of what would come out of the con-con. And I'll stop there and turn it over to Sherry.
Thank you, Chad. That was fabulous. And Lei will be equally as fabulous. Ms. Lei Ki-Hoi will now tell us some of the reasons why she does not believe we should have a constitutional convention. By the way, I just want to remind you that you have surveys. League of Women Voters has passed out one that wants to know, I think, I haven't actually looked at it, but I understand it's, what did you think before you walked in, and did this change your mind? So they're asking you to fill that out. And the Community Forums group always has surveys to ask you what more you want to learn about and just more information about that.
I'd like to say mahalo to League of Women Voters and the Community Forum and Sherry Bracken for putting on this event. I appreciate being here. My name is Lei Ki-Hoi, and I say no to con-con. Before I go into a discussion why I feel like we should not have a con-con, I want you to look at the question that you're going to answer in November. Shall there be a constitutional convention to propose a revision of or amendments to the Constitution? There's 16 words there. In my view, the question should be more specific, because basically when they put a provision like that for the people to vote on, they actually deliberately make it confusing. So what I did was I changed the question to read, shall there be a constitutional convention to revise the Hawaii Constitution? I have 10 words, and I added Hawaii, because the very first question that's going to be on the ballot does not have Hawaii. Okay, so we need to make it more simple for the people so they can understand what they're voting on. So that's my proposal. Look at the difference, folks. 11 words as opposed to 16 words. And you don't need revision and amendment. You just need one. Okay, next slide. So what is a constitution? A constitution is like a glue of society. It's like, think of yourself as coming together on this island. There's 100 people that come here, and they decide, okay, now, we're going to set up a situation where we're going to have our own rules, okay? And we want to have this document represent us. So the Constitution reflects the values and the rights of the people, okay? It sets the structure and the function of the government of its people. It sets the policy. This is very important because it's a policy that you're voting on. Legislature makes the laws, executive branch enforces the law, and the judiciary interprets it. Okay, so that's what's in the Constitution. Now, what's the chain of command? You have the U.S. Constitution, the Hawaii Constitution, and the Hawaii County Charter, and that priority is the very top one. Okay, you got the Charter, Hawaii Constitution, and the U.S. I'm sure all of you know this. I'm just trying to give you a little background before I get into my comments. Next slide, please. Now, the Hawaii Constitution incorporates the basic rights of the U.S. Constitution, such as the rights to privacy, the freedom of religion, the right to vote. The 10th Amendment is really important because it gives the power to the states to devise the type of constitution that's reflective of our people, the history, the values, the geography, and the rights of our people. Now, Hawaii is very, very unique because we're non-contiguous. We can't just jump in a car and go to another state, okay? So our Constitution is, in my view, is very unique. It represents us as an island people. Now, we have to remember the reason the Union is very strong in this state is because of plantation. A lot of the people here were raised on the plantation, okay? So we have to respect it. During the time, the Watergate, that was, I believe, it was the 78. Do you remember, Chad? So the 78 Constitution is reflective of the times. During 78, there was a Hawaiian Renaissance when people felt that there was disparate treatment of Native Hawaiians, and I agree. I am in opposition to having a constitutional convention to revise the Hawaii Constitution for the following reasons. The cost of the taxpayers, the cost of losing conservation, agriculture, and environmental protections, which affect our quality of life, the cost of losing strong labor protections, the cost of losing Native Hawaiian rights, which is very close to my heart, the cost of losing basic freedoms and rights in our Constitution, and furthermore, there's already a legislative remedy in place to make revisions to our Constitution. The cost of the taxpayers in 78 was $2.6 million. The recent study indicates that to have our Constitution would cost us in a price range of $7.5 million to close to $50 million. Cost of losing our conservation, agriculture, and environmental protections. Article 11 says that conservation and development of resources. Now, why this is an important provision in the Constitution is because the Section 1 says that for the benefit of present and future generations, the state and political subdivisions shall conserve and protect Hawaii's natural beauty and shall promote the utilization of these resources. The ultimate goal being self-sufficiency. And all the public resources that we have are being held in trust for you, for all of us. Agricultural lands. The state shall conserve and protect the agricultural lands to increase, ultimately, self-sufficiency, which is self-sustainability. And if the state tries to reclassify any of the agricultural lands, they need 2/3 of the vote of the legislature. Environmental rights. Each person has the right to a clean and healthful environment, and any person can enforce this right. Now, this is extremely important, because what happens in these three provisions, environmental, agricultural, and conservation lands, everybody in this room has an opportunity to file a claim against the state. Okay, now, so under these three provisions, we have the public trust doctrine, which says that any state and county the state and county are mandated to acknowledge and perpetuate the public trust. And everyone in this room has a standing to sue the state, which means that if you feel that you don't have a healthy environment, your water is being contaminated, you as an individual can sue the state. This is a very important provision. And maybe, I think David will talk about this as well. The cost of losing labor protections. In the Article 8, it says that private and public employment employees have the right to organize. Now, in a recent Supreme Court decision, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Janus decision. And in that Supreme Court decision in May 2018, it says that the unions cannot condition employment on the payment of union dues. In other words, if you were hired by an employee, and the union came in and said you have to pay us dues, you don't have to pay dues, but you can reap the benefits of the union. So what happened in that case is that it's really having a strong effect on unions' ability to organize. So it's going to have effect on this particular rule, and this is why I'm opposed to having a CONCON, because I'm concerned that the workers' rights will be eliminated. Cost of losing Native Hawaiian rights. Two provisions. Office of Hawaiian Affairs was established in 1978 because there was no receptacle for Native Hawaiians to receive funds from the Cedar Lands Trust. I don't know if you understand that, but what happened was when Hawaii became a state, there were lands and revenues set aside for Native Hawaiians, 20% of the revenues of Cedar Lands. And there was no organization that could be the receptacle to receive these revenues. And this is the reason Office of Hawaiian Affairs was set up. The next important provision is Section 7. It says the state shall protect rights that are customarily and traditionally exercised by Hawaiians for subsistence purposes. And this is an extremely important right for Native Hawaiians. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. So under Article 12, Section 7, as a result of traditional and customary rights provision, there is a case that came out of Kona. It's called the Pash case, and Karen, you're familiar with this. And in that case, the Supreme Court affirmed the rights of Native Hawaiians to gather opai and opailua on the lands across the street, and it's called the Kohana-iki lands. And Native Hawaiians in that case were granted the right and standing to contest the, the Nansei Corporation's development plan. So that was the first test case for Kona, and I'm actually proud that I was the attorney on that case. And I'd like to spend some time, if I could, after this and answer questions regarding the specifics of that particular case and the timeline of Article 12, Section 7. So what's the cost of losing? We also have the cost of losing our basic freedoms and rights in our Constitution. Right now, the current political climate in Washington is very toxic. It's anti-environment protections. We have a racist climate, and there's a preference for corporate America. The current case, U.S. Supreme Court case, Citizens United, allows big interests, PAC, and special interests. And in my view, they may likely affect elected delegates and their decision-making. So now, what I'm concerned about is the instability of this country, the divisiveness of the country, the corporate greed, which will likely impact our Hawaii delegates. In summary, people have an inalienable right to alter their government, i.e. their constitution. And this is a quote from Thomas Jefferson. However, in my view, only if the government and the Hawaii Constitution needs an alteration. In summary, I say no to CONCON. It's a costly expenditure for taxpayers. We have the cost of losing conservation, agriculture, and environmental protections which affect our quality of life. We have the cost of losing strong labor protections, the cost of losing Native Hawaiian rights, and the cost of losing freedoms and rights in our Hawaii Constitution. So there is a legislative remedy in place, and we can amend the Constitution in that fashion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leigh. We really appreciate it. And there'll be questions. We already have a couple directed towards you. And now David Tarnas will speak to Neighbor Island issues and anything else that he plans to talk about.
Thank you very much, Sherry.
Thank you.
And aloha, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. This is a very important issue that we as citizens don't know enough about. And I'm grateful that you're here to learn more about this question of should we have a constitutional convention. As a political scientist, I'm really interested in this process. It's rare that we have the opportunity as citizens of a state to actually revisit the state constitution. It's a unique opportunity. And so, in particular, I wanted to just touch upon what are the potential impacts to county governments. As Sherry said, as Peter said, and I think Chad said as well, the way that this state is set up, it's very centralized. We have a legislature and only county governments, nothing below county governments. And it's sitting county of Honolulu, and you've got all the other counties. Some of the counties have more than one island. But that's it. There's no other municipalities that can be formed underneath that. If you haven't had a chance or haven't taken the time, please read the Constitution. It's not that long. It's a short document. And if you take a look at Article 8, which is basically giving the authority to establish counties, it's really short, but it means so much. Each of those words means so much. So that our county council representatives right now are basing all of their authority on Article 8. And so for many, many years now, you hear one elected official after another talk about home rule. Home rule, more authority to the counties. The counties have grown up. They've matured as a governmental entity. Therefore, they should have more responsibility. Home rule, they should be able to make more decisions on land use, for example. You've heard that. You've heard that for years. Those sort of questions really can only be addressed in a comprehensive manner within a constitutional convention. As was described, there is another way to modify and amend the Constitution. That's by doing it through the legislative process. The legislature passes a bill, and then that comes to us as we're going to have this year, it comes to us as a question for us to say yes or no. But here's an example. Take a look at the measure that will be before us in November on the authorizing the state to levy an additional property tax to be on investment property to be able to be used for education. You think that's kind of straightforward, but it's actually quite complicated because what it's doing is for the very first time is allowing the state to use a taxing authority that is actually something that has been exclusively the right of the counties. So that's why the counties are so upset about this, because the counties depend for all their money on the property tax revenues. And here the legislature is saying to you, do you want to allow the state to take some of that property tax on a particular type of property and spend it on education, which is a state responsibility? And so people think, well, of course we want to have more money for education. You think that's great. But think about it to the next level below, the deeper level, and that is, should the state actually use the taxing authority that the county has? So I always look at this as being sort of the legislature, in following this process to amend the Constitution, sort of nibbling around the edges. It's piecemeal legislation. But that's what the legislature can do. I mean, that's how they can only make small changes. And when they make a small change, it might have a ripple effect that really doesn't get addressed. And we as voters often don't understand those ripple effects, those potential unintended consequences. And that's really a great thing that you're out here today to learn more about it. But I think in the Constitutional Convention, there is an opportunity to be able to address this issue of funding for education. But it wouldn't just be a simple question of, oh, can the state send, tax the investment properties more? But it would be, first, well, should, as Peter's listed down there, should we still have one state school district? Or should we break it up and have school districts on each island, in each county? I mean, that's something that's been debated for years. I remember, 10 years ago when I was in the legislature, that was a bill that we considered, we took it through, it didn't pass in the end. But that is really the first question. The second question is, well, how do we fund it? As I said, the Constitutional Convention can address home rule issues. Do we delegate more authority to the counties? And if we do that and give more authority to the counties, we've got to have, the county has to have a means of paying for those programs. So then we have to look at the taxing authority, which is a different article within the Constitution itself. But you see how in a Constitutional Convention you can address these complicated and multifaceted issues, policy reforms, in a much more comprehensive manner, rather than piecemeal as you're getting through this, the legislative process. Now, the counties themselves, they're, as you know, in dire financial situations. Our budget is really been blown apart by the volcano, and there's issues. Should the county, for example, increase the general excise tax, and there wasn't approval to take it up 0.25%? Should it be taken up 0.5%? All of those issues are really critical issues that we're facing in the county right now. So money, financial matters for the county, I think, are top of mind, and everyone's looking at those right now. And so those are the issues that are a real concern to the counties, that they're saying, hey, if the legislature is going to take some more of our taxing authority, we're never going to be able to afford some of running our own programs. So I think it's something that it's not just as simple as a small change in this November election that is going to address all of those issues. A Constitutional Convention would be able to address all those issues. Let me just mention a couple of other things. Legislators probably would be reluctant to support something like a Constitutional Convention for a couple of reasons. One of them is that, well, it creates competition. You're actually starting the process to introduce new leaders into the political system. You're giving them the opportunity to get elected, get experience, and incumbents usually don't want to have any competition. And so for people who are running against incumbents, it's very difficult. And so you would find that because the Constitutional Convention is really the springboard for candidates to enter the political arena, you'll find a number of legislators that would be very reluctant to support a Constitutional Convention, for that as being one of the main reasons. You do have to consider our political climate. And that's something that was brought up before. Is this the right time to have a Constitutional Convention? Think about it. There's lots of things you can do at a Constitutional Convention. We could strengthen our constitutional protections for collective bargaining or for public trust or for reproductive rights. There's always that possibility to strengthen and further reinforce them. But as was mentioned, it's treacherous. We might lose some of those protections. So the political environment in which we live has a direct potential impact on what the results will be from this Constitutional Convention. Is this the right time? If it's not the right time, but you think maybe in 10 years it would be the right time, what do we need to do between now and 10 years from now so that we'll be ready? When will we be ready? What do we have to do to educate ourselves as citizens so that we'll be ready to take on this awesome responsibility of a constitutional convention? If not now, when, and then what do we need to do to prepare ourselves? The League of Women Voters is doing a great job having tonight's forum, but perhaps there's going to be a lot more educational outreach that's needed before we're ready. If that's the case, we've got to commit ourselves to spending the next 10 years getting educated so we are ready. And then finally, we've got a lot of issues that are being faced, that are going to be faced in the next couple of years. You can list them. Do we want to add one more? And this will complicate matters dramatically, but the opportunity is huge. So I'm not here to try to convince you yes or no. We've got a yes and no person on the panel. I just wanted to bring up some of these issues that show you just how complicated it really is, and that the legislative process of amending the Constitution really is a piecemeal process that really can't address all of the sort of comprehensive, integrated effects of amendments of a Constitution. So there are limitations, and I think we have to be very aware of those as we move forward. So I'm going to leave it at that, but I would really encourage you, read the Constitution. It's really not that long. You can read it in one sitting. And if you really are bored, just read the sections you're interested in, and you'll find you'll be done like that, because there are very few words that have major impact. So thanks very much for being here this evening.
Thank you. David's actually right. It's not that long. I've had to look up the Constitution to understand a couple things, and it's got little short sections. So he's right. We should probably read it if we're interested. Now, I've got a lot of questions. One is that, and you all are free to answer these, our state constitution currently grants citizens more civil rights than in some other states: privacy rights, land rights, due process. Obviously, Leia's expressed some concern that those would all be taken away. I'd like you all to weigh in on what you think could or might happen. And there's another question that's sort of related, like, why do you think that a constitutional convention would take away rights that we currently have? Let me start with you, Peter, from the overall perspective. They're all always on as long as you know who's talking.
So I'm not sure what would happen. I think one of the things is this is a mystery of what would actually occur inside a convention. It's very possible that people would single out certain rights and say, we want to expand them. It's also very possible that people would say, no, we want to limit that. We've had bad experiences with those. And so I'm hard-pressed to point to which ones people might zero in on. I think one of the fears is that big political money will float in from the mainland, from PACs and super PACs, and somehow skew what the rest of us would want. On the other hand, that's the reality, and so much depends on the discussions and the dialogue and the deliberation that would happen, and the fortitude of people who get elected as delegates. So hard to answer your question, because I can't tell you which ones would be targets.
What do you think, Chad?
Well, you mentioned due process, you mentioned privacy rights, you said civil rights in general, but privacy in particular was the third as well that came up.
Land rights.
Land rights. You know, the way history tends to work is you don't generally go backwards once you've achieved these rights. People tend to like them and tend to expand upon them. That isn't to say that things can't go wrong. Look at our federal constitution. We amended it to prohibit alcohol, right? 10 years or something like that. And then we came back again and amended it and said, no, that was a dumb idea. But those rights become entrenched, ingrained, inalienable is the word that was used earlier. And I admit that it's a fear, and there's no question that dark money. Lay is absolutely right on some of the points that she raised about how it could get out of hand. Generally speaking, though, once you've got a right, you don't generally want to give that up. But I will acknowledge it is a concern.
Yeah,
You're basically being concerned with why you think this con would take away rights that are already existing.
I think that in terms of Native Hawaiian rights, there's a lot of controversy, and especially on the federal level, there's real racist strain going throughout the federal Washington environment, and I'm sure that will trickle down to Hawaii eventually with big money. What my concerns are is, well, for example, let me give you an example. When the Pash case was resolved and the court concluded on Hawaii Supreme Court, excuse me, I have an issue with my throat, pardon me. They concluded that Hawaiians can exercise their traditional and customary gathering rights on undeveloped property. This was in 1995, and subsequent to that, in 1998, there was a bill that was put through the legislature that said that Hawaiians, in order to exercise this right, they have to show proof that they're Hawaiian, and they have to go through all of this rigmarole and come up with all of this. They put so many restrictions on that particular right. So there was an effort at that year in 1998. I know Ed Case was the one that introduced the bill, Senate Bill 8. And I was a Senate attorney at that time, I believe, just left the Supreme Court. But so these rights can be taken away, and they can also be taken away in the Constitution as well. And so, because the climate is not good for this. And so that's my view on it.
Okay.
David?
I would just say that it would be, imagine the election, imagine the campaign for delegates for the Constitutional Convention. Imagine the questions that Sherry would be asking those candidates in the forums that we would be having at that time. These would be the very questions that would come up. What are the rights that you're going to protect? What are the rights that you want to strengthen? What are the critical things you want to change? So that we as voters are going to know the positions of those candidates going into the election and choose the ones that we hope to represent us. You know, it's true, yes, we could be heavily influenced by advertising, but really that comes later. I think advertising money is probably going to have the impact later when the proposed amendments come back to the people to approve them in the election following the Constitutional Convention. That's where the advertising money is going to have a bigger impact. But the Constitutional Convention itself, it's going to be as good as those delegates are, and it's up to us to be able to elect good delegates.
So that's just another reason why people should totally pay attention and vote. And I know everybody in this room does pay attention because you're sitting here, but that's a really key point. So this would be like a regular election where we would get a chance to meet the candidates, know the candidates, et cetera. You know, in 1978, I think you mentioned, Peter, that a lot of the delegates were pretty young. So we don't see a lot of really young candidates these days. What was it that drew all these young people in their 30s to run as delegates?
Is that a question?
It's a question. It's a question from more than one person here. How do we?
Kind of restate the question. Was it what would motivate them?
Why were there so many young people? And if we were to do it again, you know, what encourages people to run, and why were there so many young people?
In '78, I think these constitutional conventions are a mirror of the times. And we had the environmental movement, we had the anti-Vietnam War movement, we had a lot of stuff boiling in the state, and a lot of pent-up, kind of energy. And I think partly it was precipitated by these graduating classes, early graduating classes from the William S. Richardson Law School. So I think they said, we've heard, I mean, Chad's heard it, I've heard it, Labe's probably heard it. John Wahey has said that a number of times. He said that was the launch pad. And I think the question is, does the mirror of the times, when we look in the mirror, does it warrant changes of one sort or another? Because really what a con does is sort of overrides what the legislature is thinking at the moment. It brings the citizens into it. And the question is, what's on their mind? What's on their mind? What are the issues that they want to see either prevented or pushed? Never
Any
mind.
comments from anybody else?
I would just add, I mean, look at the 2016 election with Bernie Sanders and the support that he got from a lot of young people. And it was pretty remarkable. And by the way, let's have a plug for the middle-aged and the older people as well, because there's no reason that those folks couldn't run. Yes, you want new blood, but I would welcome wisdom and
Wisdom is
in
good.
history and things like that. I think the points that Peter mentioned, John Wayne has said exactly that. It was the Vietnam War. It was after Watergate. There was the Hawaiian Renaissance that was going on at this time, the Ko'olave, Otakam, and as well. And so it was a very different time, as it's just described. Interesting, the different time that we're talking about now is really at the federal level. Nationally, I don't know how much sometimes Hawaii, we are still so blue. I mean, you may forget this, but Hillary Clinton actually won by a greater margin over Trump in Hawaii than any other state. California was next closest. I'm talking about per voter, percentage-wise.
Percentages.
And so sometimes I wonder how much, but some of the currents that you mentioned are a concern. Brett Kavanaugh, our nominee for the Supreme Court, was involved in fighting against the Akaka bill and Native Hawaiian rights. So anyway, but I think there are people out there that would get involved.
Well, one thing I'd like to note, even though I'm not on the panel, is that you're looking about a commitment of a few months. You're not looking at completely, committing yourself to be a legislator. So that
You're
might have
getting paid
influenced.
too, and they'll fly you if you live on a neighbor island.
Yay, you get to fly over. We have a lot of other questions. Either two of you want to weigh in on the young people issue. This is a question, Chad, partly for you, but it's something that you guys have brought up. Civil Beat has been very active in covering campaign spending in Hawaii, and you mentioned that one of the major concerns is a possibility of the influx of dark money to influence maybe the choice of the delegates, maybe the actual amendment voting itself. So this person would like you to share the conversation that took place at Civil Beat as you all were discussing this particular aspect.
You saw a super PAC very active in the governor's race and a few other races. It didn't end up electing Colleen Hanabusa over David Ige, but this was the descendants, if you will, of the Pacific Resource Partnership, which was very centered around the Carpenters Union and rail. That was something that was directly as a result of Citizens United, the ability to not coordinate directly with campaigns. I guess the point I'm making here is it doesn't always work having this money coming in to try and defeat certain situations. Jill Takuta almost won over Josh Green, your own state senator here. I do think there will be spending beforehand. There has already been a PAC, not a super PAC, formed in regards to the Con Am on the property tax. And I believe there will be two. There will probably be one tied in support, the teachers union in support of it, as well as against, I think the realtors and others. But I think there will be an active push. I haven't seen any formed other than that for the CON to make people vote against it, to not even get to the election of delegates, to not even get to the idea of having voters. We did consider that. The way we look at it is we're going to report on it. We're going to reveal as soon as those reports come out, we're going to publish it. We're going to interview people and find out more. Part of the challenge is the way our campaign disclosure laws are. There's a lag time in which those figures are posted sometimes, but we will be very upfront about that and making it quite clear where that money's coming from.
Will the campaign spending laws apply to the delegates for this position?
I assume so. I don't see why they wouldn't. They would be essentially public offices.
I would assume.
I can't imagine, yeah.
Okay.
I assume-
Peter, make sure you speak into your microphone,
sorry.
and make sure your microphone, because these are the guys that need the
Yeah,
answer.
those are
I
state and
assume
county
that.
laws.
I'm
Yeah.
assuming the same thing as Chad, although I don't know, and it's a
Okay.
great question to pursue.
You know, one of the reasons you all have sort of touched on is a reason to have a constitutional convention is to get around the legislature. And I'll just use gut and replace as a perfect example of when you have a bill that you may have testified on and it goes to the very end and then magically it goes into this dark committee in the state and it comes out as a totally different bill. May have the same title, but what's inside is like, no, we didn't even discuss this. So the question is, other than a constitutional convention, are there other ways to go around the legislature in proposing constitutional changes, some other kind of body, mechanism, commission?
Speak to that there's only the two ways to amend the Constitution. There isn't a third option. I think, though, it does beg the question, if the legislature is not acting on an issue which is a top priority for the community, then that's fodder for the next election of that representative or senator, right? And I think that we've seen that before. We're seeing it now, where you have people who have been in office a long time and have people running against them. And it's happening, and we're probably going to see more of that. The challengers that we saw in this last election are not going away. And so I think so I don't think there's another option, to answer your question, to bypass the legislature, but there is a way to get the legislature to be more responsive, and that is get the ones out who aren't responsive and bring new ones in.
Well, and we have seen that just on Oahu. I know that Brookwood Galatario was a long-time legislator, and I think to a lot of people's surprise, he was defeated in the primary by a newcomer. So, it is possible that that happens, although I think more traditionally, people just don't pay that much attention, and people keep getting voted in. But
it's not easy to beat an incumbent.
I think that in North Hawaii, in the Kohala district, we had somebody defeat a longtime incumbent in the Democratic primary. Oh, that was you, right? So
Yeah, let's not talk about my campaign.
No.
But
the point is, it can
unique.
happen.
Yeah, it's unusual to defeat an incumbent. But I think the bottom line is, if people are so upset about the legislature not taking action, the other option besides making a constitutional convention to bypass the legislature is to change the people who sit in the legislature.
Right, find out what the issues are. Peter, you wanted to
So
add?
I was going back and looking at what came out of '78, and I'm looking at the list, and it's a partial list, but I'm thinking to myself, many of those could have been done by the legislature, but they didn't. And that was part of the mood, to say, we want the legislature to create a tax review commission, a council on revenues, an annual balanced budget. I mean, those are things the ledge could have done if they'd chosen to do it. And they didn't, and that's what this the '78 Con said, we want those.
Well, let me ask a question. Right now, if somebody, as we've discussed, does not vote on this issue, it's considered a no vote. How did that come about, Peter Adler?
Chad actually knows the answer.
Chad,
I'm
you can
learning
answer the
from Chad
question.
on a couple
Nice
of
dodge on that one, Peter, but
You answered the question
I'll do
once
the best
before
I
for me
can.
today, Peter.
It's legal,
better data.
it's technical. I won't go into too much complexity, but in 1996, there actually was a vote on a con. This was before the no vote. It passed, but it was challenged. You mentioned earlier, anybody can sue over this. I believe it came from a union, and they took it to the Hawaii Supreme Court. They said, you have to have an extraordinary vote, that it can't just be a simple majority, but it has to be something very convincing. And it was upheld, and essentially the no vote, the blank vote became a no vote. It later went to the federal courts. Long story short, it went back to the legislature, which passed the legislation where a blank vote makes a no vote, right? It's the legislature that enacts the laws. And then it went to a vote in 1998, and in this time it lost because the blank votes were no votes. That's a very, very rough summary, but essentially that's what happened.
I had my timing wrong, because I thought that had happened after the '78, and it happened 20 years later.
Yeah, there was another vote that came in the legislature not long after the con to change some of these requirements, but the specific challenge that made it that way came in the 90s, according to what I've read on the internet.
Oh, well, then it's got to be right. But I'm certain if legislators are concerned about a constitutional convention, if they think it's not going to benefit them, they would not be at all against having blank votes count as no votes. Now,
To
Absolutely.
the question, the question was apparently, is there any other means of amending the Constitution besides the legislature? Is that what you're saying?
or a constitutional convention. Is
Because-
there some other way, a commission or something else, to get constitutional changes?
Okay, because, excuse
Speak
me.
into the
Supreme-
microphone. Yeah.
The Hawaii Supreme Court does amend the Constitution, because if you look at Section 7 under Article 12, Section 7, it says that the state reaffirms and shall protect all rights customarily and traditionally exercised for subsistence, cultural, and religious purposes possessed by Ahupua'a tenants. But if you look at the past decision goes outside the Ahupua'a. In other words, Hawaiians that live in another Ahupua'a can actually gather in another adjoining outpool. So it's actually, this provision has been changed by the Supreme Court. So that's a means of amending as well.
I would just add, you could also amend through initiative, which we
Right.
don't have at the state level. I am correct on the 1996 article, the no vote. It's up on our website, Civil Beat. You can go in and Google it, but that's exactly what happened. So.
Right now, our Constitution says public and private employees have a right to unionize, but the legislature refused University of Hawaii graduate students this right in the 2018 session. So is this a right or is this not a right? Would a Constitutional Convention guarantee that right in a more forceful way? These were graduate students.
As a former graduate student who taught and received very low wages with very little compensation in other ways, this unionization effort on the part of the UH, it's been around for a long time. There is some irony in a state that is so dominated by labor that the University of Hawaii graduate students have not been able to organize. And it lost again just this past session. I think it's a terrible irony. I personally believe that they should be able to have that right. I think it is a fundamental right. And I do actually agree that collective bargaining may, in fact, end up being one of the key things that may scare people into voting against a con-con. And I wouldn't be surprised if the public sector unions in particular actively, and by the way, it was a union that challenged the blank vote, it was the AFL-CIO, they'll start saying you're messing with his very basic right that they've had since 1968. And I think it's a legitimate concern, and I wouldn't be surprised if you saw labor union money going in before the vote to say, don't vote against this. Especially in light of the Janus vote at the federal level is
I would say you're right, Chad.
Yeah.
We'll probably see the organized labor opposing constitutional convention because of the concern that there would be weakening of Article 13, the rights to collective bargaining.
Yeah.
But it is something that the legislature, we talk about the legislature wasn't taking action. So in '78, they passed all these things to have the Tax Review Commission, you have, et cetera. Well, so now we've got all these commissions. They write their reports. They submit them to the legislature. What happens now when the legislature doesn't take action on the recommendations of these commissions? Because that happens often, right? The Tax Review Commission, numerous other commissions, they'll come back with recommendations to the legislature, and the legislature doesn't take action on them, doesn't necessarily even have hearings on those recommendations. So I think that may feed discontent in the community because the legislature is not being responsive. And I think that's something that might also add to motivation for people to support the Constitutional Convention.
You mentioned that about commissions, and I know that one of the things that came up before the state legislature, of course, was to either restore the amount of transient accommodation tax that was originally intended to go to the counties, or make some changes. And the state legislature asked that a group get together representing all counties, in representing people from the state legislature, and come up with a solution. And the solution this group proposed was to give more money to the counties. And what the legislature did was, no, we don't want to give more money to the counties. So those people, basically, the working group is what it was called, their recommendations were completely ignored. So I kind of buy into the fact that maybe there's got to be a way to get the legislature to pay attention, because that was a bad thing for us. By the way, if any of you are interested in the TAT, there is a really excellent document about the working group's findings on the internet that is going to be relevant in the next forum we do about the educational amendment. Here's a pretty long question, primarily directed at Mr. Blair. You mentioned that states like Washington, Oregon, and California have the capability to do initiatives and referendums, et cetera. These are generally seen as relatively progressive states. Are the fairly progressive laws in those states, in your view, a result of those provisions or threat of the use of them? Or are the populations more naturally progressive? So, asked another way, are there examples of more conservative states which are driven by very conservative ballot initiatives that have been presented over the years?
It's a very good question, and the answer I have for you is I don't know. And by the way, those progressive states don't always enact legislation that's progressive. I mentioned the gay marriage, anti-gay marriage vote from Proposition in California. So I don't know. There is a National Council for State Legislatures, NCSL. It's a terrific resource. That's where I've gotten a lot of my data, a lot of my research, and that's something I think I should look into. But to the fundamental point of the question, could you, conservative elements, of course, it is driven by the voters. I'm trying to think, though, of any example. Well, Prop 13 back in 1978, where
In
property
California.
taxes will be capped. And then, of course, California went through all sorts of problems. It's ironic because Jerry Brown, I think, was governor then, and now he's back governor again, and now they're fiscally sound. But I think that was driven primarily from Republicans, if I remember correctly. So. Howard Jarvis, that's right. Haven't thought about that. I can see his face right now.
So this points out the strength or potential influence of individuals who are able to finance the collection of necessary number of signatures to get something on the ballot. And this person could be just driven to reduce the tax burden on people so that their goal is to cap taxes. And that might be their sole purpose in life and their retirement is to do this. And they're spending millions of their own money to do it. And that's what initiative could happen.
All right. Another example, I don't know if I would call this conservative or progressive, but there was a push in California to divide the state into,
Right.
I believe, 5 distinct.
Three.
Well, I've heard 3, and it's fairly easy. You can guess what sections, but I've heard others as well. And I think the court threw it out and said you can't do this. It's really a federal issue. But so I don't know if I would call it progressive or conservative. I guess what I would say is it can get out of hand, the initiative process. Literally, the literature that you have to read when you go into the ballot, into the voting booth, it's enormous.
Well, and that
One
leads-
quick question,
yeah.
something for us to consider. Do you want to support a representative democracy, right? Because that's what we usually do. We hire people by electing them to be our representative, to do all the work and research and then make their selection and make their vote. Or do we want to have this be, basically legislation by popular vote, which is a very different kind of democracy. And I think right now we have a representative democracy, and I think it can work well if we have responsive legislators. And that's really what it comes down to.
Out of the 1978 convention, I believe you said there were about 35 amendments that resulted. Is there a process built into this system that would provide for education on any amendments that come out of the Constitutional Convention? Because even now, we have 4 things on the ballot, and I imagine a lot of people will walk in there and they'll look at it and say, oh, I didn't know this was going to be there, or oh, I don't really know anything about this, or oh, Constitutional Convention, I'll leave it blank because I don't understand it, or educational amendments. So is there a provision built in that would provide for education?
I don't know.
No, and our state elections office only has a limited budget in terms of what they can do. Frankly, it'll come down to advertising on the part of who has money, but groups like the League of Women Voters, Common Cause Hawaii, others, it'll come down to you, the citizen, to educate yourself. But I see the risk here, the danger that so many will not and say, I don't know and understand this, and look at our voter turnout. But that is one of the big concerns.
So,
Peter.
I want to tell you about an initiative that is being tested this year by Colin Moore and Keith Matson. And they've put together...
And explain who Colin and Keith are.
Colin Moore is a professor of public policy at the University of Hawaii. Keith Matson is a planner and a land use planner who takes great interest in public affairs, and a colleague of mine, and we work together on many things. And they have put together a process that's going to meet over the next couple of weeks to test the idea of what might be called a citizen jury. So they're taking the CONCON issue, and they're going to bring a group together of 20 people who volunteered from different angles, and they've tried to create some balance to it. And they're going to take this issue, and then they're going to really look at it, and they're going to publish the results of it. This citizen jury method has been used in California, Oregon, Washington, a few other places. And when it works really well, what they do is they actually take a vote at the end. So what you're doing is cutting through some of the sort of blitzkrieg super PAC information or anti or for, and you have a group, they deliberate, they dive deep into it, and they come out and say, here's what's on the ballot, and here's what we think about it. And that's or they may just come out and say, here's what's on the ballot. So you have some interesting new civic engagement experiments that are going to pop up, and this is the first one in Hawaii.
These are all community-based. These are not government-funded.
Yep.
Speaking of funding, the money to fund a constitutional convention, does that all come out of a state budget? Are there county obligations?
No, it's all state money.
State.
It's all state.
State money.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of you can comment on
Of course,
this.
state money is county money.
Well, state money is our money.
County money is your money.
So you talked about the fact, and this was touched on by more than one
think.
person. In 1978, the cost was about $2.6 million overall, if you count everything. And today, just based on today's expenses, it would be between $7 and $48 million, I think you said. So the question is that a lot of money? I mean, how can you compare that to anything else that we spend money on? Is that too much?
I just say, I personally think the 45 or whatever, 48 million is exceptionally high. I actually don't think it would cost that. I think it would somewhere be in the 15 million, but that's just my guess. And I don't know, and others could guess differently. But I just think that most of the estimates have turned out to be in the 10 to 20 million that I've seen. So
So the question is, compared to everything else that we spend money on in the state, is that a lot of money?
well, we have a
You know,
$7
for
billion
me as a
budget.
person, yeah, it's a lot of money, but for a state, is it?
Well, in terms of Honolulu Rail, well, that's about 3 blocks.
But you know, Sherry, a lot of this, you know, this money could be used to, you know, to help the homeless situation, to help the victims on our island, that you know, that are victims of the volcano and the flooding. I mean, it's just, as far as I'm concerned, it's wasted money.
Okay.
Because, you know, I'm fine with the Constitution the way it is. I just think it's a toxic environment to make changes at this point. So I'd like, you know, the money should be directed for other purposes. Yeah, we do have a large budget, 7 billion.
7 billion is what I recollect. Is that right, Dave?
It's higher.
Higher than 7 billion?
Yeah, it's in the double figures is my understanding. The last time I covered the budget, it's, yeah, the state is growing.
Speaking to the microphone, but
Oh, I intentionally did not.
I happen to know that the State Department of Education budget alone is $2 billion.
Yeah, I believe it's in
So
the double
I would think that
billion
our
figures.
state
I'm almost
budget is
certain it's
bigger than-
11, 12, 13
Yeah,
million.
it's got to be
yeah,
bigger.
So
In
I'll get
19
letters tomorrow, you watch.
Did you want to weigh in on that question, David, the cost? I mean, it's a cost, and
I could say that, yes, it sounds like a lot of money to an individual whose household budget is minini, but when you do look at it as a percentage of the state budget, it is small. And the bottom line is, this is the fundamental document of our state.
Yeah.
So I personally wouldn't look at the cost as being the decisive factor to support or to oppose the convention. I think you really should be looking at the substance. Are there issues that you feel are critical and they need to be addressed, and the legislature is failing to do it, and our only way to do it is through the convention? That really, I think, is what should drive people's decision, a yes or no on this convention. Because the cost, I mean, it's going to cost money, but this is something that is our fundamental document. And so, I mean, I think it's worth the money if we're going to do it.
One thing that Peter Adler said when we were just talking about, you know, the need to get people out to vote, people don't, you know, I personally think everybody should vote because I feel like it's a civic responsibility, but not everybody feels that way. So what makes people vote? Maybe it's because they have an issue that they think could be addressed by something. So, you know, if there's an issue that you think would be addressed by that, maybe that's why you vote for it. Now, the question is, did the delegates in 1978 end up breaking down into specific issue-oriented factions? I see nods. Chad,
Yeah.
Peter?
I'll turn to Peter because he's.
No, I mean, they did. There were a number of factions, and they're kind of hard to, more conservative, more progressive. I mean, the kind of usual things that would happen in that kind of a conclave with 102 delegates. And the one piece that's kind of funny is there were a young group of young Turks, also lawyers out of the law school, who John Wahey called them the Panasonics.
Yeah,
And and he said, you guys are just slightly ahead of your time.
yeah.
So there were groups out there that really split on a lot of different issues. And the coalitions did a lot of horse trading and bargaining, and, it was
It's like anything
politics.
else. It's like
It was
the
a political
legislature.
event.
And those factions changed through
That's
the
right.
convention itself. They
That's
started out one way.
Yeah.
And through the force of persuasive, powers of Frenchie DeSoto and others, she was able to bring people in to support significant changes, creation of OHA, adding Hawaiian language as an official language. I mean, those are huge.
There were a couple people in there that were catalytic converters. And Frenchie DeSoto was one on the Hawaiian affairs. Nobody saw that really happening. It was in the mood, it was in the mirror of the times. But Frenchie really went out and just ignited the issues, got Hawaiian as a second official language, helped create the State Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And the other woman was Charlene Ho, who actually created a lot of the water work and the Water Commission, Public Trust Doctrine. These two women were instrumental, very powerful in their impacts.
By the way, fiscal year 2018 budget totals $7.2 billion in general funds, $14 billion in all means of financing.
There you go.
Billion as in boy.
14 billion.
Billion. B.
Billion.
Oh, I heard him, because I know if the State Department of Education is 2 billion.
Yeah, that's,
the whole
and
state
the
has to be
DOE
more.
isn't even the largest expenditure. I believe it's now DHS, Human Services, but it used to be DOE for the longest time.
So based on what you've said, though, about delegates, it sounds like if there is a constitutional convention, whether we're here to be for it or against it, if there is one, the choice of the delegates is really, really important. So that election would be a critical election. Do you know roughly any idea how many people actually ran in 78 to get the 100 and whatever?
We can
I mean,
find out
is
some
this
of
a hotly contested thing? Do a lot of people want to be delegates?
It's a great question. I would hope so. I tend to be optimistic about this. It was been 40 years, but what an opportunity to be on the stage and potentially launch your own political career as was done 40 years ago. I think it may work. Hopefully it'll attract more voters than OHA races do. But this will be, think of the power of social media to get somebody elected this time around. None of that existed. You can actually go and look at the newspaper clips from 78. It's weird to be reading the Honolulu Advertiser, the Honolulu Star Builder.
Right.
These black and white photos of people like Leslie Hara and Carol Fukunaga, and to see them back then. But, and answer your question, I bet people will turn out to run. I think it's just too much of a unique opportunity.
Well, just to give you one comparison, and I don't know if it's a fair comparison.
Speaking of the mic.
Sorry. The Native Hawaiian Constitutional Convention, which took place 2 years ago, there were supposed to be 40 seats, and there were 155 people who ran for it.
And Lay, weren't you one of those?
Yes.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's a comparable figure, but you have 3 times the number that Perry whittles down to one group. So who knows?
So there could be. So here's a question. If somebody is interested in an issue, but they really don't want to or don't have the time to be a delegate, is there any provision for people who are not delegates to have input into the process so they can get their issues brought forward?
The convention, once it's formed, writes its own rules. I would be quite surprised if they didn't fashion something in there for hearings and outreach, and so it'd be quite stunning.
Can you imagine if they exempted themselves from the Sunshine Law? I think he's absolutely right.
Oh,
The
gee.
media attention, the pressure would be so tremendous.
That's right.
That it'd have to be a public event, I would think.
Don't you think, David?
I would expect that there would definitely be some opportunities for public testimony. I would be surprised if they don't seek to exempt themselves from the Sunshine Law.
You'd be surprised if they don't.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's, having been a legislator before, it's a lot easier to operate without the
true.
Sunshine Law, to have that conversation with a number of legislators in caucus, to come up with some ideas that will actually have legs and can get traction and get support. And it's very difficult. Talk to any council representative. It's very difficult to operate with the Sunshine Law. I'm not here advocating we tear it apart, but I would say that the convention itself would seek to be able to operate without that.
Would they have gut and replace, though?
Yeah, well, gut
Who
and
knows?
replace, that's in the rules. And so the convention will develop their own rules.
That's right.
And, frankly, the legislature could correct this problem of gut and replace by rewriting their own rules. So,
They could, but there's also the Constitution to abide by, and it's quite clear that a passage of a bill requires 3 readings. Right now,
Oh, yeah. No, I-
although there's a difference between readings and hearings, but the League of Women Voters and Common Cause Hawaii currently have a challenge on gut and replace, which David's absolutely right, it is legal. But if you're not abiding, and it is in the Constitution, it's quite clear. And so we'll see whether the Supreme Court takes that up.
you have to have
You're
3
saying
readings.
it's in the Constitution right now
You
that
have to have
gut and
3
replace
readings.
is legal?
Well, it doesn't say the words gut and replace.
Just checking.
David's right, the House and Senate do write their own rules, just as a con would write their own rules. But the Constitution makes very clear, I don't remember which article it's in, but any bill has to have 3 readings in both chambers. And gut and replace, they kind of has to do with the title of the bill, and there's some other technical things, but thus far they've been able to get away with it. By the way, pro-gut and replace is, and you'll hear this from lawmakers all the time, hey, you keep an idea alive, and maybe it dies early and maybe it deserves to come back. But the con against this is, but you're not giving us time to talk about it, and you're doing it behind closed doors, which, by the way, is what conference committee is all about. It is done entirely behind closed doors, and bills go into conference committee, and they come out completely rewritten afterwards without any input from the public, so.
Yep.
Peter, you touched on this, but we just want a reinforcement. What's the process? You're in the Constitutional Convention, you come up with an amendment. How is there a check to make sure it's not illegal, conflicting with something else?
It has to go through the Attorney General, and it has to get vetted there. And I'm guessing the Attorney Generals
the
would be available during the convention as well to help advise and counsel on that. I mean, that's part of what they're supposed to do.
Just checking.
Yeah, no,
If this does pass, it's nice to know that there's a way that it'll be accomplished without completely wrecking everything.
well, it doesn't
by
mean
coming
also
up with a
something
bunch of
can't be
illegal
challenged
things.
in litigation later on. In other words, you could pass something and later on, it may go to the courts and say, no, you can't do that, you got to go back and change it, and that happens.
Right, it does, and as Lay pointed out, people can challenge and the Supreme Court can overrule, et cetera.
Right.
Someone commented that the state legislature might have little incentive to give enough time for the process because the state legislature may feel threatened. So, feeling concerned that they might lose some of their powers. Is that preventable? Is that just a fact of life? Comments on that. Maybe that's not a fear that people should have.
I don't quite understand the question. Could you
State,
phrase it?
Maybe I could just say, if the worry is that the legislature will somehow handicap the convention by limiting the time that it has to do its job, I think that's the concern. Okay, you've got
limiting the time or modifying the process in some way,
Or
so
the
you're right,
budget.
so they can't do the job.
Yeah,
Starving.
starving them, not giving them much time, not giving them enough money. And that's going to be, the legislature takes action, and that's when people can give testimony saying, the legislature, you need to allocate additional time, you need to allocate additional money, you're not giving them enough time, you're not honoring the process. All that, the legislature has to debate that and have it in a hearing, have it in committee hearings. So that's the opportunity for people to speak up and say, and call the legislature on it if they're not giving them enough time or money.
Yeah.
So it's up to us to prevent that from happening, us being citizens.
Got it. Okay, I have no more official questions, and I'm going to give each one of our panelists an opportunity to make final comments. But does anybody have a question that they just were dying to ask and they didn't? There's your chance.
Over here?
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to have.
Wait.
Could anyone address the Hawaii State General Assembly process and how that would integrate or become part of how we represent who we are versus, there's a lot of us that we can assemble and we can talk to amongst ourselves on the things, and then we tell you as a representative how we want it represented.
I'm not familiar with any assembly. In the Constitution, right, we've got the legislature, bicameral, and there isn't any other assembly. That's it. In terms of how the people can actually give their input to the legislators, that's really up to the legislators to seek out and welcome that input. But I don't know of any formal mechanism other.
I don't. Of course, the First Amendment allows for the right to petition government to assemble and so forth. And so broadly, it's considered, I don't know, General Assembly as a structure I'm not aware of. Are you talking about changing the way our representative government works, or our state representatives and senators? Is that what you're talking about, or?
I'm going back to the original Constitution, on how we have started with the general to create what we all are representing. So the power goes back to the people, as it should be. And we get to tell you our grievances, and then you go to the state and you tell the state how this county would like to see things happen.
I see.
Which would be called General Assembly. So it would be Hawaii State or Hawaii County General Assembly. So the power goes back to the people.
Well, I do think that is what a con would be about fundamentally. Yeah.
It would be
Yeah.
a start to that unless the legislature decides that they want to do the.
And I wouldn't be surprised, although I don't think a little fear is a bad thing. I think a little scare under lawmakers actually would be a good thing, and make them realize that they do represent us. And if they're not representing us, we can vote them out, or we can actually use a con to put forth new laws.
Well, there are 19 enumerated services that the government was supposed to.
I see.
Was delegated to do, and then we send them to the government to present our grievances, and this is how each state is supposed to represent at the federal level. So bringing it back to the county is really where the power is. This is the power. It's not y'all sitting there.
Well, they're just panelists, they're not legislators.
Well,
Just
one
so
of
you
them
know.
might be.
Well, but I'm not now.
He used to be. We need to move
You're on
on
your
to our
way,
closing
David.
comments, and I'd like to give each one of you a minute to give us your final thoughts, and let's start with you, Peter Adler.
So this is it's a complicated issue. The more I've studied it, the more bewildered I get by all the complexity. I will make a decision for myself on November 5th by midnight and be ready to vote on November 6th. I remain undecided. But I think the thing I would encourage you to focus on is something we said, which is figure out what's the issue or short list of issues that rise up on your concern list. And they could be issues that are overlooked or passed by at the legislature out of frustration, or it could be something new, then you say, we need something new in this area. Think issues.
I would focus on the excitement. Yes, it's bewildering, and there's a lot of complexity to it, and there's going to be dark money and so forth. But it's so rare that we have this opportunity. I mean, it's every 10 years. The legislature doesn't do it. We get to decide. It's been 40 years since we've had it. And remember, the 78 Con was held not all that long after statehood. This is a remarkable opportunity. All states have the ability to amend their constitution, and historically what you're seeing is fewer and fewer of them are actually taking this opportunity. Even at the federal level, our U.S. Constitution has only been amended less than 30 times, right? I mean, there's the Bill of Rights, and then is it 28 amendments? I forget what the number. I know what the 25th Amendment is, but that's another topic altogether. I look at this as a remarkable opportunity, a conversation. Are you satisfied with the status quo? Do you like the way things are going in Hawaii? Is this who we are? Is this who we want to be? This is your choice, and so that's the way I would look at it.
Lakey Hoy. Please.
It's a bad time. It's a bad time politically, United States, and I just feel that, like I said, it's a toxic environment, and the mood is that, it's anti-environment, corruption, and it's not a good time because, some of these big businesses and big self-interest groups will be coming into Hawaii, and they may have an effect on the elections of delegates and decision-making of delegates, so it's not a good time, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm concerned about all the environmental protections that we have and in place, and conservation, agriculture, and for Native Hawaiians. For that reason, I'd say vote no. Vote no on this convention.
And what I would like to encourage everyone is, as you come up with your list of things that need to be addressed, Peter says as our first step, what are those critical issues that need to be addressed? Even if the people decide not to have a constitutional convention, I would say take that list and start working the legislature. Get the legislature to be responsive. Use your enthusiasm, your motivation, whatever it is, to get the legislature to pay attention and take action. Don't lose hope in the legislature. I know it's hard.
Thank you.
That just came right out. I know Hawaii legislature does not have a good reputation. I get it. But there are folks that want to make changes. So don't give up yet.
Okay, we won't give up. I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I want to remind you that both the League of Women Voters and the Community Forums Group have surveys that they would like to have returned to them. Be sure to encourage your friends to learn more about this issue and all the issues. Vote411.org is the website for the League of Women Voters, and they will have pros and cons for each of the issues on which we're going to be voting, also information on all the candidates. And I want to invite you back for Wednesday, October 3rd at this location, 6 o'clock to 8, to talk about the other thing that we will be voting on, the actual amendment to the Constitution to allow the state to tax investment real property for the purposes of public education. Similar forum in Hilo on the 27th, next Thursday, 4:30 to 6 at Arc of Hilo. And thank you so much for being here on behalf of the Community Forums Group and on behalf of the League of Women Voters. You guys are great, and let us thank our panelists for being here. Aloha.
This is the representation of the kind of quality of speakers that we have here at West Hawaii Forum. And we put these monthly forums on to provide as much civic involvement and education on issues that are important to you, the community. We are one island. We are one community.